But I just really want to start, of course, acknowledging the land. You know, we here, this Toast Talk is taking place on the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I have absolute deep gratitude to be here with you today on these lands, grateful for the rain. I was just in Texas this last week for a conference, and actually a Canadian opened the conference up with a land acknowledgement. And she also provided a lot of context for the acknowledgement, because apparently the previous time she did that, people had no idea what she was doing and why she was doing it. And that really, you know, anchored me again in, often we do these acknowledgements and I'm getting used to doing them, but that's not ubiquitous everywhere in colonized places. And so it's still really important to reflect. And what we were able to do is have, you know, some poignant conversations with folks around what is the land upon which they live in that they're visiting from. And so I also like to invite you folks, whatever land you're in, if you want to write it in the chat as well, to acknowledge that too. At this conference, there was a lot of talk about gratitude as well. And it was the conference was around philanthropy. And so this, having to reflect quite a bit, I always like a bit of a check-in question. So I also invite you folks in the chat to provide something you're also grateful for with us here today. And I'll start that I'm grateful, many things, but for all of you, I think that time is just such a rare commodity and luxury, and that you take the time to join us here today to hear more about First United and to participate is, I've got a lot of gratitude for that. So thanks. So agenda, what we're going to do, we're going to hear from Sarah Marsden. She's our staff lawyer doing some work around evictions, which I think you'll find quite fascinating. Then we'll talk a bit about our programs, what's been happening, and then of course the redevelopment, and we'll get you out of here by 5:15 like we typically commit to. So thanks everybody, and just want to start. Oh, there's my bio. Thanks, my colleague popped up my bio. I've been happy to address you as our interim executive director, an appointment of 3 years. Last time I was here with you, I was the acting executive director while Carmen was on her sabbatical. Some of my background, volunteer-wise, you can see working in the community. A lot of you might be familiar with Pivot. I'm on the board there. What we do is we use the law to get to the root causes of issues around social exclusion and poverty. I'm proud to be on that board. And DTS Response is a group I co-founded with some folks in the neighborhood when COVID-19 came. And now we do some direct response in the encampments along the Hastings corridor and in Crab Park. Well, if I don't know if you know, we changed our fiscal year. So we're actually like happy new fiscal year as of October 1st. And happy to share that our year ended really strong due to the amazing hard work of our staff and of course the support of our board, volunteers and donors that make this all possible. We're in this transition period of the redevelopment, which is massive. You know, our team is deployed in 9 locations, including housing, until the new building is complete. And while we're in these different locations, we really are more committed than ever to maintaining team cohesion and also continuing to provide those essential services, community connection and healing through our meals, legal support, shelter, spiritual care, and taxes, filing taxes. So again, grateful for you. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to invite then Sarah Marsden to digitally appear and discuss the eviction mapping and law reform work that her and her team are embarking on.
I'm just laughing slightly to myself as I see a picture of myself on the screen. So I actually have some visuals that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to use as, yeah, Katie's nodding. Is that, so am I going to go ahead with just verbal? Okay. All right, so hello, my name is Sarah Marsden. I'm the staff lawyer, First United. Very happy to be here today. And I just wanted to add a bit with regard to my role specifically in land acknowledgement, which is that I work with colonial laws and thinking about law reform. So in my work as a person descended from settlers on unceded land, I think a lot about how the laws that we work with, even when we see laws protecting tenants, for example, they all come from colonial property laws and very specific understandings of property. So when I talk about these things, we are talking about law reform, but we're talking about really specific forms of colonial law, and just to kind of reinscribe that reconciliation in action is really a central piece of this, something we always have in mind. Thank you for enabling my slides, Katie, or Sarah, or whoever's doing that. Thank you very much. So I want to tell you a bit about this project. So why are we doing eviction mapping? I'm not sure if you've seen any headlines about eviction and housing. Obviously, housing crisis in BC, but we're also the jurisdiction with the highest eviction rate in Canada. And that's paired with the fact that it is easier for landlords to evict tenants here than it is in a lot of other places. And when I say easier, I mean, for example, that a landlord, there's just not much of a chance for someone. If someone's late on the rent, it's quite unforgiving. If someone makes too much noise, it's quite unforgiving. And there's a lot of latitude for landlords to evict tenants compared to other jurisdictions where people might have a chance to pay those rent arrears, or they might have a chance to remedy the problem. And the conversation about eviction and the conversation about homelessness are often two different conversations, but I really want to bring them together in this work, because as advocates, we often see people getting evicted and then ending up homeless when maybe they didn't have to end up homeless if the legal protections were a little bit different, or if they were able to use them in a bit of a different way. So this project is trying to document what's happening with evictions, because that's something that we don't have any information about in BC, because this kind of project has not been done here before, and especially because most evictions do not get dealt with by any kind of government agency. Most evictions are just landlord evicts the tenant, and most of them don't get appealed or anything like that. So we're trying to get more information where we don't have information, but we know that eviction causes homelessness, causes enormous financial hardship, family separation, damage to community, damage to relationships, health problems, overdose issues, and all sorts of negative impacts. And we also know that certain groups are more at risk of these negative impacts, including Indigenous people, people with disabilities, and other groups. So we're documenting those stories in BC. And I want to share a little bit about what this is going to look like as it unfolds and some of the initial data that we have. And by the way, I would invite anyone to unmute themselves and jump in verbally with a question at any point. I talk a lot, but please do just jump in if you've got anything you want to ask about this. So eviction mapping, it's something that has been done in some other places. And if you see this image, you can see this is from Boston, the Boston Anti-Displacement Project. And you can see that there are points on the map that show where someone has been evicted. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that a family has chosen to tell their story. So you see the sort of data points, but then you also see people giving a lot of background about their family, how they ended up in that neighborhood, what the circumstances of their eviction were, how it impacted them, and so on. And I'm happy to report that a lot of people in our that have responded to our survey also want to tell their stories and give that background, give that context. And I think that's really useful for people to be able to see and relate to. So we're hoping over the next few months to develop a dashboard that looks something like this, but for British Columbia. So you can see where evictions are happening, what the impacts are, and you'll be able to filter by various different factors as well. So that's underway. I'm really excited about that. And I can share a couple of the sort of interim results. I hesitate to use the word results, but just to say what we're seeing so far. Just a couple pieces of information that I can share. And one of them that I thought was really disheartening but important to see is the extent to which people do not stay in the same neighborhood after eviction. So we ask people how much more rent they're paying, if at all, and we also ask people whether they got to stay in the same neighborhood. And as you can see here, almost 90% of the people who are evicted do not get to stay in the same neighborhood. And a lot of them also pay more rent, but that displacement is taking place as a result of eviction. And something that also, I can't say it's surprising working as a lawyer in this area, but important to document. the percentage of tenants who have been evicted but have not yet found a new place to live. So almost a third of people who responded to this don't have somewhere else to live yet. That is probably about 90% people who are now homeless. It's not all people who are homeless, because some of those people are waiting for their hearings and they're not yet resolved, but by and large, these are folks who have not found a place to live and they're homeless. And it's not people only in the downtown east side, but we're seeing people across Vancouver and across BC in that situation. So we've also had a lot of response from people in terms of specific impacts of eviction. I haven't listed them all here. This is just a sample, but these are more or less representative answers of what some of the things that people have told us. Families that can't find new housing that suits their family, and you can see that there's a quote there from an Indigenous family, intergenerational family, nowhere to go, end up homeless, sleeping in parks, sleeping in shelters. These are things that we're hearing over and over again. Family separation is another theme that I didn't really anticipate coming into this project, but it's something that I'm seeing quite prevalently. The number of people who are sending their children to live elsewhere because they can't secure housing that is safe enough or adequate for the basic needs of their family, that's prevalent in this information as well. People selling their possessions, and a lot of people who do not end up homeless, but end up in housing that is grossly inadequate, unsafe, unsanitary, or otherwise inadequate. So these are themes that we're seeing. And in terms of what else we would like to do with this project, we're going to keep listening to the community, the people who want to talk to us. We're hoping to get up to 500 responses by the holiday season. As I mentioned, we're going to be developing a visual map. And I think this is important not only to report on what we're doing, but as something that's interactive with the public as well. So I want people to be able to see themselves in a greater story, right? I want people to tell me their individual stories, and I want to amplify those, but I also want everyone to be able to see kind of what's happening on a community level. So the map is something else that will come back to the public, that will come back to communities. We are going to be strengthening our focus on reconciliation in action, specifically by looking at the impacts on Indigenous people, by looking at the kind of Western ideas of property that underlie the laws that we use to regulate residential tenancy, which are often ideas of ownership and exclusion. And we're going to be looking at different ways of thinking about property. And we're going to be looking at what it would mean to have respectful relations. What would it mean to have laws that promote more respectful relations between Indigenous and settler peoples, between all peoples, and between landlords and tenants, just kind of taking that more relational perspective. And through that lens, we're going to be looking at areas for law reform, to establish a law reform platform that's very specific. So instead of saying, let's have stronger rights for tenants, I would like to be able to say something very specific, like let people have 3 months to pay instead of 5 days, so that they can be housed and they can use the rent bank, and they can access their own resources, and a number of other specific suggestions. And I'm hosting a roundtable of other legal experts in this area to try and develop those very specific suggestions to try and improve protections for tenants. Before I move on, I gave a bunch of information about this, and I'm wondering if anyone has any questions or feedback that they want to share before we go to the next slide.
Hi, Sarah, it's Sandra.
Hi.
I'm curious, as you're aiming for 500 responses, how many responses have you had so far?
We have 170 so far.
Great, thank you.
Okay, welcome. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions?
Dorothy, I wondered if you were pursuing housing as a human right.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you can tell us where you're at on that one?
So, I mean, pursuing housing as a human right, to turn that into law reform, there's a few steps, like breaking down the understanding of what it means for housing to be a human right. And there's a lot of work on this at the UN level, for example, some of it has been adopted by the Canadian government in terms of recent moves to have a housing advocate. One example I can give you that will translate directly into law reform is the idea of proportionality. So proportionality is referred to in all the United Nations work on housing as a right. And what proportionality means is that you have to consider, there has to be a way of considering the impact on the tenant before an eviction takes place. So like the consequence is proportional to the action, right? So if tenants make a lot of noise once, they shouldn't be kicked out forever from a place they've lived for 15 years, for example. And this concept of proportionality is something that comes from an understanding of housing as a right, but does not presently exist in BC law in any form. So that would be one rights-based approach. But I also think we can get a bit deeper on the issue of housing as a right by seeing all of it through a lens in which housing is actually not a commodity for people to own and make money from, but rather is people's homes, right? And that those two ideas don't sit very well together. But if we start to see it as someone's home, then we can justify something like letting people have more of a chance before they get evicted, and not letting landlords have as much of kind of unilateral control of the relationship as they do now. So I think there's definitely a lot to say about taking a rights approach, but those are two aspects of it that I can comment on now.
Thank you.
Further development on that sort of that theme. I wonder if your project gets anywhere near addressing those who believe if you have a housing right, you also have a right to flip.
You mean that a housing right might include property rights?
Yeah, I believe that. I believe the real estate industry needs to be really accountable for the advertising they do around flipping.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you even get real estate people dropping off their advertisements saying, "I am an expert in flipping."
Mm-hmm.
So as long as that stuff is going on and people are buying into it, all the laws in the world are not going to help us get housing.
Well, we'll see. I mean, hope springs eternal in my heart, at least.
Well, so does mine. But
I think
realistic.
To answer your question about rights, I want to distinguish between, like, anyone can use the word rights. Like, people can say, I've got a right to, own weapons, or I've got a right to flip my house, right? I've got a right to make money. But happily, we have a body of international law talking about what human rights actually are. And they aren't whatever someone wants them to be. There's actually definitions of what it means for housing to be a human right, and none of them have to do with profit. So I think, using rights as a lens means focusing on the idea that it's a home and not a commodity. And I mean, anyone can try and claim rights. Anyone can say, I've got the right to make millions of dollars as a landlord, but that is not supported by the jurisprudence on rights. That's not supported by the UN perspective on this, and that's not supported for anywhere in the discussion of and definition of housing rights. So I don't feel like the argument that there's a right to flip house is that strong. And I do think that there's a pretty strong critique from the decolonial perspective as well, insofar as it's very incomplete to say that a home is just like another asset that you can do whatever you want with and just use it to extract as much money as possible, right? Any more than the earth is or the land is.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. Anything else before I move on to more?
Just one thing I wanted to say about that is, it seems that the approach that we ought to take, and I don't want to take all day about this, but I mean, real estate costs money to build, it costs money to maintain. Is there any thought about, I mean, you've got this incompatibility between the right to be housed, whatever that means, and the actual cost of doing so. Right? And really, if you look at that, the way that our welfare system works, there's not a lot of actual integration between those two.
Mhm.
Right? So if somebody says, okay, we're going to change the law so that somebody who's behind on the rent now gets 3 months to pay instead of 5 days, there needs to be some sort of integration, some sort of guarantee that the landlord isn't going to wind up 3 months out of pocket instead of 5 days out of pocket.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate but true. But you can have the right to housing, but it's understood that not everybody on their own without assistance is going to be able to afford that right. It just seems that we, rather than looking at it as a supplemental thing, it needs to be more of an integrated thing. You're a family of so, you've got X much income, you need this much, right, to have your right to housing achieved, right? Let's look at who fills that gap, right? Because that seems like a good use of our welfare money, right? The taxes that we spend on welfare, rather than just saying, oh, we'll give you X dollars a week in rental assistance and good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear your points about supply and about needing to integrate this like larger form of tenant protections is just one piece in this large housing question, which also includes things like investment in social housing and rent control, meaningful rent control, and preservation of existing stock. It includes things like municipal regulation, zoning, and densification, and empty homes tax, for example, another interesting piece of this. But absolutely, thank you for your comments on the context of this. That's all completely accurate. Could I ask for the next slide, please? So I want to share what our outreach materials look like a little bit. And of course, if anyone wants to pass this information on, we're happy to have more people hear about the survey and fill it in. This is a image of the card that we use. It's got a QR code on it. So those that have smartphones can do this. We are also out in the community talking to people who don't have access to technology in person, taking their stories, doing surveys with them. We try to make it as accessible as possible, but we do use quite a lot of print media that looks like this to promote this project. And I've also got contact information on the next slide for myself for the survey. If anyone wants to have a link to the survey, if anyone wants to contact me with any kind of follow-up questions about the survey or pass this information on. And we've also got presence on social media. If anybody wants to amplify this, pass it on via social media, we're always happy to get the word out in as many places as possible. And if you have feedback that you're interested in giving, please feel free to contact me, even if you don't want to mention it in this meeting. Please, I'm always open to hearing from folks about this. And thank you so much for listening to this project today.
Any final questions for Sarah before she leaves? Not the last. You'll hear this.
I like the thumbs up. Thanks, Carrie.
I have to say our governments are very interested in this project.
Yeah, and I will drop a link in the chat. Thanks, Mike.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's been so amazing having you join the team this year, and the work that you're doing and is getting a lot of folks buzzing in the neighborhood. How powerful and important this is. So, and what a great community engagement piece. So thanks so much. Okay. Oh, back to me. This is some neighborhood updates. Just want to share, often when I talk about the downtown east side, I really always stress that this community deserves our attention, care, and our support, especially now. Encampments, those what we colloquially call tent cities, they're really called encampments, and they're not campers, they're residents. And we know that these are a regular feature. You can hear it in the news, but they are growing. We know that fires are displacing a lot of folks even more because they're in inadequate housing. These SROs, single room occupancies, just don't have the fire safety that's required. Of course, we have a devastating effect of a drug overdose crisis. And I say, you know, this community is a deep struggle and it's a deep strength, though. It experiences a complexity of issues ranging from the criminalization of poverty to mental health, personal and historical trauma, and that they grieve up to 2 of their neighbors per day due to an overdose crisis. And, you know, as we're on the front lines always responding to these, we also practice public advocacy work. So for instance, recently we did a campaign demanding more action from our government to stop these overdose deaths. We had a letter writing campaign. You may have participated in it. We had over almost 350 respondents send a letter to their local MLA. And again, thank you if you did participate. So what else is happening in the neighborhood? Well, there was an election. We're very interested in the community and seeing how this new majority government will respond in this neighborhood, the downtown east side. And frankly, there is some anxiety around some of these campaign promises in the ABC cohort around more policing and what that means down in the downtown east side. I'm part of a coalition. First United is part of a coalition with other grassroots groups, small, large organizations. We get together and every week actually talk about issues and how we can as a group, and there's around 30 of us, support one another's work. And at the end of the day, obviously community. We put together a list of priorities in the downtown east side, circulated to the new council members and the mayor, hoping for, you know, 100% response about where they fall in issues that really matter to us. And some of our top priorities in community here is around the Hastings encampment, around what is going to happen with residents along this corridor, around the drug poisoning overdose crisis, around housing, right? Around sanitation needs, basic human dignity and access to sanitation, around community economic development, which is a very fascinating topic around participatory ways that folks in community can participate in either informal or formal economic ways. We want to know where they're at with an equity lens through anti-racism, where they stand on reconciliation, women's rights, LGBTQ rights. We want to know more about community safety or alternatives to emergency response, which is a big conversation you're going to start to hear a lot more about around how can we as groups, not just in Vancouver, but other major cities, reallocate resources away from law enforcement into more medical, mental wellness response and community activation responses. We want to know where they stand on climate change and some other issues and policies. But, you know, as we're in this community and in this complex neighborhood, this beautiful neighborhood, so deep with their commitment to one another, so is our team's commitment and some of our programs. So our food truck, I think you folks might have heard about our food truck. It has turned into, it didn't take very long, something incredibly iconic. It's at Gore and Hastings across from our construction site. We are serving more meals than we were serving when we were in 320, just the access and being so visible. We also, during in the summer, as a response to the encampments, partner with the city to be able to go and serve meals to folks throughout that corridor. There's Keeley. And we've also, this will excite some of you, I think we have expanded our spiritual care program. We hired Reverend Jennifer Goddard Shepherd as our interim spiritual care director. Some of you might know her, for this next fiscal year. And we're looking forward to the program she is designing in concert with Lauren, our Indigenous spiritual chaplain. As you can see on the slide, she's creating what she's calling a ministry of presence. And the best way to make connections is to be in the community, right? So in the context of spiritual care at First, Jennifer plans to create those opportunities so that people don't have to come to us all the time. We're going to go out to them, and you can read more about her work in our upcoming newsletter next week. So our redevelopment, I think if you joined us last time or have popped into some of our social media or emails, we shared a lot about the totem pole ceremony that when we took the totem pole down. We actually have a 2-minute video that was made by Sarah Winters, a different Sarah here. We just want to share it with you. It's 2 minutes and it just gives a really nice summary of that day, and we thought it was something special to share. Thank you. hard to describe how special that day felt. Many of you, of course, have probably seen it in the gym there. And I do admit, when Bernie was telling the story in person, she was saying that it's not, I guess, really about homelessness. It's about houselessness, because we all have a home. Our home is the land. And the context she was bringing to that was powerful. So yes, our redevelopment. I like this shot. So you probably know that a few months ago, we put up, you can even see it around there, we put up 10 fencing. Who took this photo? It's a new photo. Who's the drone? Anyway, it's amazing. Anyway, so we've been for a few months doing hazmat and hazardous material removal. I just want to be honest and say it's taken a few more months. I have to say we had more asbestos in this building than typical. And so we have to be very careful and cautious as we remove it all. So it'll be a few more months until demolition, but we will let everybody know when that's going to start. And it does take at least a month. It's not a dramatic demo. It's piece by piece. And oh, I know how you got this photo. We have a time-lapse camera that we're going to film the whole thing too, that we're going to share with you as well, of course. And also, everyone always asks, how's it going with the capital campaign, that first floor campaign, we call it. So in 2020, I guess before I started working here, we had a feasibility study done where it said that we could maybe raise up to about $23 million from the private sector, but we had to get like 5 million from the government. And that's when the goal was 28 million. The goal is now 30 million. We know things increase, especially with inflation. But I do have to say, I'm so happy to say we hit a big milestone and have just gone over $25 million. And that isn't from government money. That is from all of you, corporations and communities of faith. It's exceeding our pace in timing and expectations of even that initial feasibility study that I know some of you probably participated in. We also have something called bridge financing from BC Housing, which gives us this luxury, I guess, of being able to fundraise up until 2026, which means that we can take on multi-year pledges payable over each year, which is a nice and flexible way for more people to participate in the campaign. This fall, you'll see us everywhere again. We're doing another Public 3.0 launch. We'll be in buses, billboards, etc., where, if you recall, David Eby, nicely, our premier-to-be, shouting at me, "You are everywhere." And that's what we continue to be, not only to raise actual money for a project, but to bring upon awareness in the community, done through a lens of dignity and compassion. So the success of this campaign and the ongoing momentum absolutely could only happen with your deep commitment. That is our cabinet, many of you are here, our board, our donors, our corporates, some of our new donors has joined us today, thank you. Our communities of faith, our community at large. I mean, gifts are from smaller to larger. It's been incredible to witness. And we are about, supporting a downtown east side where everyone's worth is celebrated and all people thrive. And I didn't realize this is going to have such a gratitude vignette through today, but it only makes sense because that's what we are. Very grateful for all of you. And grateful for the staff. We've got Katie, Will, Sarah, Trista here joining us, providing tech support for me today. Thank you. We have a few minutes left for questions. We can unshare the screen. And
so Amanda, I have a question. Does Luma Native Housing have their financing in place?
So yeah, the financing. So First United is the owner of the full project, including the housing portion. So we're securing the funding for that Luma will then become the operator for. And that funding comes in two air parcels. One's called a community housing and the other supportive housing. Supportive housing, it gets a larger grant from BC Housing. And then community housing will happen when the project's all complete. We'll switch that air parcel. It'll be a mortgage and that will be Luma's. Now, if you all got that in that one sentence, that is impressive. Our big thing, of course, is the capital campaign, the 4 floors. that is non-resident, as we call non-residential portion, we're still advocating to receive larger grant funding for that piece. We're very grateful of BC Housing and the funding they provide, but also as enabling housing, we're still there advocating to be provided with funds there. Any other
Just ask a question. We're coming into what may be a fairly high inflationary period, higher interest rates. I mean, for those of us old enough, which is probably just about everybody here, but we'll remember what high interest rates were like in the 1980s, right? This will be the first time we're maybe facing that in a generation, really. Are we ready for the fallout? Because, I mean, when I took my first, I grew up in Australia, but when I took my first mortgage in 1989, the interest rate was 15% on my mortgage. Right, and I refinanced 4 years later for 9% and thought that was a deal. But we've had,
well, what we have right now, which is we have what's called a fixed price contract.
Okay.
So yes, there's interest, but we're getting fixed price contracts. There will probably be what's called change orders. And we have very large contingency pockets,
okay,
which is great. But yes, the cost of the project is increasing, but not to the point of something that would be alarming or would stop it. It's not going to be stopped. It's happening.
okay.
I see a question in the chat. Where are we meeting? Well, in the redevelopment, all the locations. Oh, I wonder if I should have a test in my head, all the addresses. I'm at 368 right now, Powell Street. This is the administrative office. We have 467, which is our shelter on Alexander, just about a 2-minute walk away. We have 542, our advocacy office in the Jenny Pentland building. We've got 501, our community help desk along Hastings. Around the corner at 360, Jackson, we've got our spiritual care. Don't anyone tell me what I just missed. What did I just miss?
You want a hint, Amanda?
Pardon?
Do you want a hint?
Oh, Clark Kitchen 628. Well, in my defense, that's just so mobile. I couldn't define where it is. 628 Clark, thank you, is our commissary kitchen that we make a lot of our food from, and then the food truck rolls in daily. Any other questions in the chat? I got time for another one. Well, I like you all. I appreciate all of your time. My email address is burrows@firstunited.ca. I always like the questions too. Our team here, Katie Conkin, who's First United there. She is the newly promoted Director of Development and Communications, because the department does development and communication, fundraising, and talking about the work. So
Hi, everybody.
Trista Baldwin here is our campaign manager down there. She's the one that got that aerial view, I think, of the building. Thank you. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so
That
much
was a
for
great
joining
update.
us.
Yeah, everybody, I invite you to put your volume back on and say goodbye all at the same time. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.
Coming.
Stay dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your good work.